cops have read it, what is the most "what the F happened here" moment you've experienced? One time we got a call about a minor wreck in a highway corridor. We get there and I'm handling the accident. 100 yards down there's a car on flats, and another further down from that, unrelated to the accident. One of the drivers walked back to us and told us a sketchy guy had been stopping at these cars to offer his help in fixing the flats. The theory was that he threw something on the road to flatten the tires so that he could help and get money from the drivers. I'm stuck at the back end of this mess, on the radio trying to get another unit to detain the shady guy. All of a sudden, I look over and there's a guy in nothing but a hospital gown and an IV hanging out of his arm, just tootling along the shoulder. The nearest hospital was several miles away, so I have no idea how he covered that distance with nobody noticing. So here I am with 1, a car wreck, 2, a guy possibly flattening tires on purpose, and 3, an escaped hospital patient, all completely unrelated on a major highway late at night. But what you fail to consider, OP, is that the escaped hospital patient is the one who is flattening the tires. I don't know, this is crazy. How did he get there? What happened? Story 2. I used to be a cop. We got a call from a guy who claimed to be the victim of a robbery and was incapacitated in his home and had only just managed to reach his phone and call us. We arrived to a trailer home that was completely empty except for a man in hardcore fetish gear, tied to some sort of, swing. I mean, there was nothing else in this house except for the gimp tied to the swing. Nothing. No furniture, not even curtains. So I say, "Okay, dude, what the hell?" And he says, "Well, you see, officer, I hired 2 Asian escorts to spank me while I was in the swing. Nothing illegal there. No intimate acts. Just some spanking, and they'd leave. Well, the girls arrived, tied me to the swing, and then 2 Asian guys showed up and beat the living crap out of me. Then pulled up a U-Haul trailer and stole literally everything that I own before leaving me hanging here with my cell phone, because they said they knew nobody would believe my story anyway, but the cops would probably chase them for a murder. I still don't know if I believe his story, but never found any evidence to suggest he was lying either. I just didn't find anything at all. Story 3. I found 3 kids one day running next to a busy highway. The oldest was 5. We finally got them identified and figured out they lived about a mile away. We got there. They were in the care of their adult, 20-ish sister while their parents were on vacation for 2 weeks. The sister decided she would rather pop Xannies and smoke weed than deal with the kids, so she locked them in their bedroom for about 10 days, occasionally sliding food and water past the door. There were urine stains on the baseboards in the bedroom from where the kids had decided their bathroom should be. Finally, the 5-year-old had enough, and figured out how to unlock the bedroom window and make a break for it. That's nowhere near the darkest stuff I've seen. We don't like to talk about it. Story 4. Late to the party, but my favorite so far has got to be the tale of UFO/aliens. I was a cop on the res for a while and had my fair share of crazies. One night I'm driving around and I get a call from dispatch. There's a UFO out in one of the farmer's fields. Okay, so I get to the house and talk with the guy. We know each other. He doesn't seem that loony. I turn my spotlight onto said field and sure as crap, there was something not quite right there. It's meddling crap. So I go bebopping through the furrows and hoping my scarediness isn't showing because this is, well, freaky. It was an autumn night with the wind howling and clouds blowing overhead. I get closer. I have one hand on my holstered gun and the other shining my flashlight. I was rehearsing what I was going to say to our new overlords, and then my brain finally clicks as to what the hell it actually was. A wad of those stupid mylar balloons all blown up and caught on some weeds. I'm talking like 20 of them, just chilling and scaring the crap out of me. I grabbed them and walked back to the farmer. He started laughing and then I did too. I handed them over to him and got back in my squad, still shaking. The sad part was he passed away a few years ago, and his family gave me those deflated balloons that he had kept. I have them in my basement now. Story 5. I'm taking a slightly different approach in answering this question. A couple of months ago, I got a QA, questionable activity, call. It's a catch-all for anything suspicious. The caller stated she believed someone had snuck into her backyard, climbed up on her second-floor deck, and then left an imprint of their dong on her sliding door. I show up to the call about 5 minutes later and she's mad at me because I didn't schedule an appointment to come over and her kids saw me. She didn't want the kids to think something bad had happened. After we get past her anger toward me for showing up, she shows me the glass sliding door in question and, in all fairness to the caller, there was a sizable smudge and imprint on the glass. However, the imprint looked nothing like any dong I've ever seen. In fact, the imprint looked really similar to the dead bird lying on the deck next to the door. When I pointed out the dead bird and explained my belief that no dong had been placed on her door, the caller became incredibly irate and told me she moved to our city because it was supposed to be very safe, but now she was thinking of moving away because naked people throwing dead birds at her house was more than she could handle. Realizing I would not be able to rationalize with her, I left and wrote my report. Some people don't deserve to call 911. I understand being protective of your children and not wanting weird freaks to be doing weird freaky stuff. That being said, if there is a dead bird and there's a smudge on your window that looks like a dead bird, you gotta put 2 and 2 together, ma'am. With all due respect. Story 6. Former cop. Was a rookie deputy and got this call that a man got his foot caught in a garden tiller and was bleeding profusely. It was a 20-minute drive, so I had time to plan out my actions. I figured the ambulance would be about 10 minutes behind me, so I was going to tourniquet above the knee, and I assumed he'd be unconscious and or needing CPR. I get there and it's a huge farm building with 2 guys just standing there smoking. I grabbed my medic bag, not a medic, but it had a tourniquet, C-collars, gauze, etc. I run towards them to ask where the patient was, and they were white as a ghost, just smoking while pointing behind them. I went inside, and behind a big John Deere tractor was a huge PTO-driven tiller about 7 feet wide and 3 feet tall. There was my victim, with his back against the tractor tire. His left leg was sucked into the tiller and wrapped twice around it with the sole of the shoe next to his face and toe pointing towards the left. His femur shot out underneath the tiller and was beautifully white with no blood. He looked up at me and said, "Can you help me?" Now, keep in mind I'm 21, thought this was a garden tiller, and assumed I'd be able to do something, but I was completely out of my element. 2 ambulances, the rural fire department extrication team, a welding company to cut the machine apart on scene, a helicopter, and a surgeon that came to amputate on scene later, and he was free. Story 7. This is my uncle's story. Not a cop, but the call was sent to the fire department instead due to the strangeness. The truck was sent on a call for an unknown disturbance, which basically means anything in the world. They get sent an address and that's pretty much it. Truck drives down the street looking for this address and they get to the end and all they can see is an abandoned lot with nothing but bushes. Even though they can't see anyone, they have to get out and investigate, so my uncle and a couple of the guys get out of the truck and start walking around with the usual, "Fire department, call out." They didn't hear anything for a while and were about to pack it in as another pointless prank call, when my uncle walked past a bush and heard rustling. He looks over and sees a man standing kind of awkwardly behind a bush. "Hey, Mr. Fireman." Did you call 911? Yes, sir." My uncle steps a bit closer and realizes the man is buck naked and standing at a strange angle. He motions to another firefighter that he found the caller and goes behind the bush to begin assessing. He's a firefighter/paramedic. That's when he realizes that the man has what he refers to as a freaking bunny tail on his butt. Of course, they try to get the man to explain why he called in distress and what was going on. After a bit of avoidance, the man finally admits that he had taken a toilet brush cleaner and shoved the handle up his bum. Being the enlightened individual that he is, he chose one with a hook on the end to hang up in a bathroom. What my uncle and the other firefighters assumed was the hook had gotten stuck on something internally because they couldn't pull it out, and it caused the man significant discomfort when they tried. My uncle left the man with another firefighter, getting his information, and went back to the truck to call for an ambulance. Of course, at this point, he always mentions that he walked around the truck to see the rest of the company trying to silently die of laughter out of view of the bushes. When the ambulance arrives, my uncle meets them with a grin on his face and tells them to brace themselves before walking them over to the bushes. They assess the man and conclude there's no way for them to remove the toilet brush in the field, and that they have to admit him into the hospital for surgery. The only problem was they couldn't figure out how to get him into the gurney without causing him to move in a way that caused him more pain. They ended up throwing a blanket over him, and the firefighters helped maneuver him in sort of a downward dog/mountain position with his bum in the air to keep the toilet brush at the right angle. At that point, my uncle decided that the fire department was done with the call, and the paramedics could handle it from there. So they loaded up the company onto the truck. As they began to drive away, he says, "They were loading this guy into the rig as we drove off, and the last I saw of him was that blanket falling off and that damn bunny tail of his sticking straight in the air." Story 8. A friend of mine is a cop in the UK, and his story is more WTF as he saw it unfold, but missed how it all started. It was his first week out on patrol and he was assigned to an experienced partner. They respond to a burglary in process and are told that a nearby dog unit was already on the scene. When they arrive at the property, they hear a commotion outside that's clearly between an officer and a suspect, and they open the garden gate to assist the dog unit. What they then witness is a suspect face down on the grass, an officer stamping on the suspect's back whilst holding his arm up near her hip and shouting, "Stop resisting." The police dog is absolutely going to town on this guy's buttocks with his teeth. The suspect is unsurprisingly struggling and resisting, and then ends up kicking the dog. The dog then latches onto the guy's leg, starts ferociously tugging, pulls it off, and then runs towards the new cops on scene with it. It turns out it was a false leg, which no one except the suspect knew at the time, and my buddy, the cop, said he just froze whilst trying to figure out how the hell he calls this in, and whether or not he should retrieve the man's leg from the police dog. Now, I know this probably isn't the case because, trained police animal or whatever, but part of me wants to believe that dog just really wanted to play fetch with the leg. I mean, hey, he brought it to the new cops. He wanted to play. Story 9. Not me, but my dad. When he was on the road years back, he got a call from a man saying he was locked in someone's closet. So he goes to the location of the call, which was a project housing unit, and knocks on the door. A man answered exclaiming, "I caught one, I caught one!" My dad has absolutely no idea what this dude means until he opens up the closet and sees a dwarf tied up in the closet. Apparently the dwarf was going door to door for some organization, and when the psycho dude opened the door, he thought he found a leprechaun and proceeded to catch it, and threw it in his closet for safekeeping. OP, with all due respect, why are we calling the dwarf it? Come on, man. Story 10. To be honest here, the majority of WTF happened here cases are usually the most gruesome and traumatic. My partner and I are both police officers with the military, so our experiences are somewhat different. I retired from the force this year, but thinking back on all the memorable cases we've had, the most WTF happened cases were all people taking their own lives and death related. The misadventure deaths usually take the cake for complete WTF worthiness though. One involved a guy who was found hanged in his bedroom. He was wearing a dress and heels with strings attached from his feet to his ball sack. We believed he liked the tugging sensation when he walked around the room. There were numerous jars containing seed all over his bedroom. Some of them had been knocked over. It was just a complete mess. The only thing that comes to mind at the scene is WTF. Story 11. I'm not a cop, but a friend who is told me about a call from an apartment building where the tenants were complaining about a smell coming from one of the apartments. When they went in, they found the bathtub full of fecal matter. Turns out the occupant had a thing for it. His parents had money and had to hire a crime scene cleanup crew from 100 miles away to come clean it up. He had never before that day heard of that kind of preference. Come to think of it, I don't think I had either. Story 12. Not a cop, but my parents were officers who would sometimes tell me things. One night in the jail, an inmate was on the floor unresponsive. The officers and nurse come in to give him chest compressions or whatever, and the dude is just dead. Turns out he broke off the temple piece of his eyeglasses and somehow managed to wedge it into his chest. So while they were giving him chest compressions, they were actually just shoving that piece of his eyeglasses more and more around in his chest. Story 13. This one happened to my friend first day on the job. He's driving with his partner. Normally we don't have partners, but for the first 6 months when you start, you're paired up. Also, we have community volunteers, which are like unarmed but trained individuals who assist the peace officers, so 3 people total. He's driving down a highway when he sees a man on the side of the road near an entrance to an access road for a cottage. The man is naked and covered in blood and pointing down the access road, trying to get their attention. Turn on lights and go down road. The man is signaling them, and when they pull over, he just leaps into a woods and starts running alongside the road. They follow. They get to a cottage and the door is open. They turn to look at the naked man and he's gone, vanished into the woods. There is also visibly blood all over the door and deck. Supervisor gets out, goes into the trunk, gets the shotgun, and gives it to the unarmed auxiliary, saying something like, "Cover out back and try not to shoot us. We're going in." He and my friend draw their pistols and go. When they get inside, there is blood everywhere, like from a movie. All over the walls, furniture just everywhere. Enter the living room and there's a man on the couch with a couple of knife wounds to his stomach, but is alert and seems actually not that bad. But he's holding a pit bull on a leash. "If you let that dog go, it's dead," says supervisor. Guy ties leash to the side of the couch. Puts his hands up but won't say a word. "Is anyone there? What happened? Are you okay?" Nothing. He's not answering. They place him under arrest and auxiliary takes him to the car. They continue searching upstairs, cleaning rooms out until they get to one of the bedrooms. They look in and there's a guy under some covers but still obviously awake. "Show me your hands." The guy hears them, throws off the blankets to reveal he is also naked, stabbed and about to die from blood loss. Paramedics come and house is fully cleared out. As it turns out, the 3 guys, including Naked Forest Man, were all drug dealers just having a get-together. They started doing X, and after getting really high, it turned into a bit of a trio. In a moment of lucidity, one of the drug dealers realized he wasn't gay, grabbed a knife, and that escalated into a gay knife fight. I don't know. Hence all the blood. That was day 1. Story 14. Not me, but my dad's a cop. They went in an apartment to get a dead man and had to check his ID card. It said he was a Caucasian expat from the UK, so they were confused as to why the body that they had found was that of a black man's. As it turns out, his body had just turned entirely black because he'd been dead for so long. The newbie that they made retrieve the body vomited and fainted. But apparently newbies are made to retrieve the body, so he had to do it in the end. Story 15. Too many to choose from, I forget them all. So how about non-fatal ones that are kind of upbeat? Car in a pond. Guy bought the car, hated it, got so angry he literally drove it into a pond, and they left. Ticket for littering because I jumped in to see if anyone was in the car. Car wrecked in a tree, like in a tree, up in the middle of the branches. I just don't know how. Half missing, decomposing dead body from natural death. Turned out the many cats in the house ate half that person. Okay, that one was gross, sorry. A ride along had a warrant and got tased by the officer they were with, trying to run from them. That was more of a what the hell moment hearing it over the radio. Guy going through a divorce decided to renovate his house at 2 a.m. with a sledgehammer by taking out all the walls and furniture because his future ex got awarded the house. Didn't arrest him, it was still his house, but just keep the noise down, please. Story 16. I was a passerby during a public argument between two strangers. I passed by before the police rolled in. What I witnessed: a foreigner trying to fight with a Greek vendor. They started throwing each other around. People step in to separate them, but they won't let go. One guy loses his pants and underwear. The other guy's trying to swing at his balls. A young girl rushes in with a chair and breaks it against the head of one of the randoms who tried to separate them. An older grandma throws her shoes at the girl. The girl who got hit by a chair throws the shoes back at the grandma who gets hit square in the face. The younger girl takes her shoe off and smacks his head again, while the grandma runs over pulling the girl's hair. The guy finally gets a grip on the other guy's dong, while one other guy who is separating them is biting on his head trying to get him to let go. All the while, a woman is screaming from the balcony above them. Yeah, I don't know either, man. Story 17. I've never been a cop, but my dad was for several years and I've heard plenty of stories. The one that I think fits this thread the best came from early in his career when he was still pretty much a rookie. He and some of the other cops got called to a house to follow up on an old woman who was suspected to be dead. When they get there, they find out the woman was a big-time hoarder with stuff stacked to the ceilings and paths leading to each room barely big enough for one person. While my dad is walking around taking this all in, one of the other officers suddenly puts his hand out and tells my dad to stop right where he was. Dad asked why, and the officer said, "You almost stepped on her." My dad looked down to find the old woman dead and buried under her own stuff. Story 18. It's more of what an old friend told our family. They see a lot of screwed up things. I'll tell you the two that I remember the most. In order for the paydowns/body searches to happen, a medic or a nurse has to do it. Don't know why, but it's just one of those laws that probably protects the people being searched. An escort came into the station. They did the pat down for her, and when they got to between her legs, they found a tree car air freshener shoved up her. It wasn't folded to be put there whatsoever. Her reasoning for having it there, you may ask? Well, it stunk. Story 19. EMT, but I have got to jump in on this one. We responded to a call at a Motel 6 near Washington, D.C. We get to the room and there's a skinny guy in tighty whities at the door screaming incoherently. We go inside the room and see what he's pointing at. A dude about 300 pounds, butt naked, covered in baby oil that was completely unresponsive on a tarp. We try to get him on the stretcher, but he keeps sliding off. We use the sheets and even curtains to try to get the oil off him to no avail. We eventually have to call the fire department to help us get him up. And even when we get him on the stretcher, he slides right off. Eventually, we get him strapped in and take him to the hospital. He did pass away without ever regaining consciousness. Apparently what happened was this married father of 3 flew to DC to meet his internet boyfriend. One of their things was the dude taking Ambien and letting the other dude just bang his face. Doctors suspect that the Ambien caused his epiglottis to react, and baby oil got into his lungs where it blocked his alveola. I'm still curious how notifying the family went on that one. Story 20. In high school, I took a criminology course as an elective, and our teacher was a retired officer. When we asked him for his weirdest story, he told us about a repeat offender. The offender was a homeless homosexual gentleman that had a penchant for exhibitionism. He said he got a call out for someone exposing themselves in public, and when he arrived on scene, he found said gentleman with his ankles to sky, naked as the day he was born, with a half-empty bag of avocados and a can of Crisco. After taking him to the station, they found the other half of the avocados strewn about the back of their cruiser. Story 21. Not a cop, but have a story. So a couple of years ago, I was in a fender bender. I'm driving down our small town main road late at night on the way home. Small town, so to keep noise down at night, all the traffic lights along the main road are set to green as default, and red to the sides, so that big trucks don't have to stop and use their noisy brakes. I'm tired after a long drive, so I'm cruising at the speed limit, green lights all the way for me, and out of nowhere a car suddenly comes screaming into the intersection ahead of me, leaving me with no time to even react. I T-bone them at an angle as they're entering the main road at quite a speed and ricochet off. My car spins around twice on the slightly damp road before coming to a stop without hitting anything else. The other car doesn't even slow down, and just keeps driving on, leaving me sitting there feeling like I'm that random innocent car that always gets wrecked in a movie when the villain makes his escape. Skip ahead until authorities arrive. Cop gets out of his car, sees only my car that's almost wrecked, and absolutely no damage to anything anywhere else. He looks me up and down, sees blood rushing down from my face from a head gash from destroying my rearview mirror, and goes, "What the hell happened? What the hell did you hit?" Some questioning later, while the medics are putting a bandage around my head, the other car arrives with only minor damage. The cop must have seen the relief on my face as the other driver walked over and explained that his wife was going into labor, and he had to get her to the hospital. While we were busy at the scene, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl with no complications. He then left quickly to come and explain, and he even showed us pictures of his newborn on the phone. I didn't press charges, and his insurance paid for fixing my car and medical bills. The what the hell on that cop's face, though, was epic. Story 22. I'm a cop. A fellow officer and I were on the way to violate some citizens' constitutional rights at 4 in the morning when we saw a woman standing in the sprinklers of business on a street. The woman was wearing nothing but a silk robe. Super bizarre. The woman was swaying with her hair and her face, just standing in the sprinklers. We stop out with her because it's creepy as hell. My buddy approaches her. She's unresponsive, looking like that girl from The Ring. We notice she has earbuds in. He reaches and pulls one out. The lady looks up and starts screaming, "Where the hell am I?" Scared the crap right out of my buddy. He legit thought she was a zombie for half a second. She found out that night that she sleepwalks. No known family history because she was adopted and never knew her birth parents. It was the first time she's ever taken a large dose of Benadryl as well, so that probably didn't help. Either way, she sleptwalked about half a mile through a bad part of town. Glad we found her first. Story 23. Not a cop, but I was there in the aftermath, and years later when the rest of the story came out. When I was in my first year of college, my girlfriend had a roommate who was dating a highway patrolman. One night we were laid up watching TV at her place when he came up in the patrol car. He never did this. The car went to his home and stayed. He came in and fell on the couch mumbling 199. Just 199, over and over. After a while, he got over the shakes and told us what happened. He was sitting on a stretch of the highway nicknamed Snakeback, as it had lots of hills on this 20-mile straightaway. They would sit in the bottom of the hills and catch speeders, as you couldn't see the car until you topped the hill right before it. Pop speeders with radar and wait on the next one. Well, he's sitting there and the radar goes off. 199. This is the top reading his radar unit can show. He looks around, clears the reading, and lays it back on the dash. 199. What the hell? Picks up the gun, aims it down the road. 199. He's about to start the diagnostic test because there's got to be something wrong with the unit. And row. Whole damn car shakes. Trees are moving and he about craps himself. All he saw was a blue streak. He didn't call it in or anything. What would I say? Hey, there's a blue streak coming your way at 200 miles per hour? He just came to us as we were the closest people he knew. After about an hour and a smoke, he went back to finish his shift. 2.5 years later, I'm with a friend who's a pilot at the local airport. One of his buddies went to tell his favorite story. He was flying back from a trip in his Cessna a while back and saw a cop sitting on the highway in the same spot he'd gotten a ticket and decided to dive bomb his butt. He took his blue Cessna balls to the wall dive bomb straight at him, laughing his butt all the way to the airport. Was this about 2.5 years ago, I might ask? Yeah, how'd you guess? When I told him the first part of the story, he doubled over laughing. I was fully prepared for this to not be a real response. Like, I was 100% expecting Sonic the Hedgehog to show up at any moment. Instead, a nice 1-2 of a story. Story 24. So we wanted to talk to this guy who had a history of child offenses and had been reported approaching kids in the town center. He was living out of a van which had been in the same spot for a couple of months. I never seen the van myself, it was just known by many others that it was there. 2 others went to where he was approaching kids, and 2 of us went to see if he was in his van. It was an old, rusty, beaten-up piece of crap with windows on the sides and back. Note that this guy definitely lived alone. Front windscreen, bottom half blocked with beer cans, top half blocked with women's underwear draped across the top. Side window smashed, but smashed outwards. Other side and rear window smeared with honey on the inside based on the empty honey jars we could see, and inside, floors completely covered in women's clothing and underwear, and lots of sanitary towels scattered around. Sparkly heels in a children's size, and in the center of it all, 2 raw pork chops with no packaging, just sitting there in the middle of the floor. I can get the beer cans and women's clothing, presumably an alcoholic with some kind of cross-dressing habit. Not exactly ordinary, but whatever, far from the weirdest thing I've seen. But why was the window smashed outwards? Why are the shoes in a child's size? Why the hell would you smear honey on the inside of the window? Why would you have a raw pork chop in the middle of your van? Never did I find out the answers to those questions. It all got passed on to a different team. Not sure I want to know given the guy's history, and I don't even want to say what my guesses would be. Story 25. It's about a buddy from work who's not a cop, but a volunteer firefighter. He used to get called to really bad accidents on the I-95, a very busy interstate highway. He gets called to this bad accident that involved 4 people, or what was left of them, and a highly intoxicated lady that was driving way too fast. Turns out that the 2 girls in the car were fine, while both their boyfriends were outside the car to change a flat. Whilst doing so, here comes the drunk lady, and she creams both guys doing 100. My friend, let's call him Bill, gets there and tries to do chest compressions, which he couldn't really do because the guy was missing the whole right side of his chest. so basically his entire chest caved in. At this point, understandably, the girls were going crazy, saying there was another guy involved but Bill can't find him, until he made his way down to the drunk lady's car. The body was pinned underneath the car and was dragged 50 yards down the road. All that was left was barely identifiable as human. Don't drink and freaking drive, people. Edit. I reread this to my buddy over text and he made some corrections. There were 2 cars that were hit by the drunk lady. The second guy, not the first guy with a missing chest cavity, wasn't under the drunk lady's car, but he was under his own car that was parked in front of the first guy's car, the one with the flat. So that makes the second guy being shoved under the car in the front. I then asked him wasn't someone decapitated because he tells me a lot of messed up stories and he says no, that was another accident. Story 26. Not exactly on topic, but funny story. I was an MP in the army. Adjacent to our base was an open field, owned by the army but uncontrolled. One dark night, a van and car went to the far end of the field. One person gets out of the car, gets into the van. Lights are on in the van, but it's too far to see what's going on. We thought it was something bad, drug deal or something similar. Lights go out in the van. We blocked the exit, approached on foot, shined our flashlights all at once in the windows, and gotcha! Oh, it's the young adult daughter of the base commander, on her back, with this guy's face between her legs. After a lot of laughter and embarrassment, we told them this field was always watched, and that they would never be undisturbed there. Over the next year, the following scene played out a dozen or more times. I'm on duty at the base gate. Van approaches, he's driving, she's in passenger seat. I motion for them to stop, recognize the 2 of them, smile and wave them through. He smiles and waves, and she curls into a ball and hides her face. Story 27. Preamble. In Canada, police officers take on the role of crime scene examiners. I know that's done by civilians in other countries. So I'm at a suspicious sudden death. It's a typical Canadian November day, about -5 to -10 Celsius and clear. I get a call that there's a dude dead in his living room and it looks sketchy. I attend and speak to the patrol officer who found the guy. He tells me a neighbor called in a wellness check on the old dude, so he shows up and tried knocking/ringing the doorbell. Door was locked and nobody came to answer, so he checked the perimeter, and when he got to the back patio door, he could see the old guy collapsed in the living room. He and a backup unit breached the front door, and sure enough, there's a dead guy laying in the middle of the living room, but surrounded by blood. Has obvious trauma to his head, consistent with some sort of firearm wound. Then the patrol officer shows me around to the side of the house. There's a rifle there leaning against the side of the house along with blood splatter. It appears consistent with someone having been shot at that location. Suddenly, alarm bells start ringing in my head. Things aren't adding up. I meticulously check the grounds surrounding the house and find no blood trail at all. If someone had murdered the old man outside, there should be some blood trail leading from the shooting site into the house when they moved the body, and there's none. There's none in the house either, just a pool by his head. There's absolutely no spatter stain in the residence, so he was clearly shot outside. This was starting to look like a murder, not someone taking their own life. No normal person could sustain a head wound like that, drag themselves into the house without bleeding, and then die inside. But a murderer sure could drag a body inside without leaving a trace if they were careful. So then I start getting super anal about things. I'm checking grass to see if it's been flattened, checking shrubs by the side of the house to see if there are any recent breaks to the branches that would indicate a person brushed up against them, looking for footprints on concrete tiles, fingerprinting doorknobs, windows, everything. Nothing unusual shows up. I call for a consult. 2 very senior NCOs, one a bloodstain analyst, come to look at things, and are as baffled as me. They start talking about things quietly, and I'm standing there waiting for some advice. While I'm waiting, I realize I haven't done one of the standard tests we technically are supposed to do at even obvious sudden deaths with bloodstains. Indirect hemastics testing. A hemastics is a presumptive test for blood. When you put blood on the yellow test strip, a chemical reaction changes it to a dark green color. So I grab a swab and strip from my kit and take a sample of the blood pooled around his head to test, just so I can check the box that I tested it and it came back positive as possible blood. But it didn't. The hemastics didn't react. For the second time that day, I experienced a WTF moment. It was clearly blood. It was pooled around his head. Or was it? I took another swab, this time directly next to the wound cavity, and tested it. Negative. What the actual hell was happening? Okay, I thought, the strips must be expired. No biggie. I have a new container in the van. I'll go grab them. I grabbed a new bottle and confirmed the expiry date, pulled out a strip and did the test. Negative again. Now I interrupted the NCOs and pulled them over and demonstrated the test again. They both had stunned looks on their faces. There was no way the blood shouldn't be causing a reaction. I made a phone call to the lab and they were stumped. I called our headquarters in Ottawa and spoke to one of our research scientists, and after getting some advice from them, determined what the hell was happening. See, I said before no, quote, normal person could sustain that kind of wound and drag themselves inside afterwards. Turns out the old man wasn't a normal person. He was in very poor health, and he wanted to take his own life due to constant chronic pain and health issues. One of the meds he was on was known to not only have the side effects of causing false negative reactions to blood reagent testing, but to also dramatically lower user blood pressure in colder temperatures. The old man went out with a rifle and shot himself in the head, hoping being outside someone would hear the shot and call 911 so police would find his body, explaining the stains on the side of the house. But he was a bad shot and the wound wasn't immediately fatal. Unfortunately, no one had heard the shot. He passed out from the pain, and the combination of the medicine and lower temperatures slowed his circulation enough that the wound partially clotted, and with the lower pressure, he didn't bleed out right away. When he regained consciousness, he stumbled into the house and locked the door behind him, laying down on the floor. The activity and increased ambient temperature got his circulation going enough again, increasing his blood pressure enough, and he bled out on the living room floor. Turns out he took his own life after all. And we later found evidence locked up that included a recent note in his own handwriting. Story 28. Not a cop, but imagine this. At 8 p.m., you get called to find a possibly disoriented teenage boy armed with a pocket knife and who has a history of violence against strangers, especially when touched, who has run away from home after an argument. You find someone who looks like the guy you're looking for, ask him who he is, and lo and behold, it's the dude you're looking for. He agrees to being brought back home as he's feeling a bit cold. You see, it's 11 p.m. in late November, and he was 3 cities away from where he lived. It took you 2 hours to get this guy back home, and he has a deep and insightful conversation with you the entire time. Sure, it seemed like mild schizophrenia, but not to the degree that he needed to be admitted or something, so you played along. That guy is me. Story 29. Not a cop at all, but my grandpa was in the FBI in the 60s to 80s, and has some interesting stories he's told me. Back in the day, there was a wanted man who they'd been trying to find for a while. They knew where he lived, but every time they would check to see if he was at his apartment, there were never any signs of him. He lived far away from the city in a relatively rural area of Texas. One day my grandpa was off duty and was in the area, I'm not sure why, and decided to check on it, not expecting anything to come of it. The guy wasn't known to be dangerous, if I recall correctly, so my grandpa didn't think much of it going to check on the house. He went up to the door and knocked. The door opened up after a little while, and lo and behold, it's the guy they're looking for standing right in front of him with a pistol in his hand. I don't remember exactly what happened since I was told the story a while ago, but he managed to disarm the guy and get him cuffed. The guy didn't resist and later claimed that he was practicing his quick draw. After my grandpa got him into cuffs, he put the pistol on top of the refrigerator in the room, assuming that the wanted guy was the only person in the apartment. My grandpa started taking the guy out of the apartment to his car. As he was reaching the door, he heard a yell from behind him. His girlfriend had been in the apartment the whole time, and when he turned around, she had grabbed the gun from the top of the fridge and demanded he let the guy go. So instead of letting him go, Grandpa used the guy as a human shield and told her to put the gun down. She refused, so he approached her with her boyfriend in between them for protection. He got close enough to throw the boyfriend into her and subsequently cuffed her too. The whole time the wanted guy was pleading with the girlfriend to stop, and didn't struggle against my grandpa. My grandpa only took the wanted guy because they were far from the city. I don't remember if he went back for the girlfriend later or if he got back up to do it. Threatening an FBI agent with a gun is an absurd move. It sounds like your grandpa handled it pretty well, though. I don't know if using a human shield is in the FBI handbook, but it did seem to work. But I sure don't remember seeing that on Criminal Minds. At least not from the FBI agents. Story 30. Not a cop, but a security officer for a downtown bus station. The station is home to a lot of homeless people, less fortunate, and plenty of troublemakers. We usually know all of the troublemakers by first name because we deal with them on a regular basis. So anyway, I made a deposit for the bus station and noticed a fella asleep on the bench inside the lobby. Usually, not a big idea, but that would mean I would need to wake him up later when I returned. Unluckily, this day we had a troublemaker hanging around. Now, most people think that we deal with common drug dealers and gangbangers at this bus station, which is true. However, we live near a rural area with lots and lots of poor conservatives. So several of our troublemakers are also old angry white dudes and freaking sovereign citizens. Oh, I hate them. Anyway, I returned from the deposit to see several cop cars pulled up and a guy getting frisked on one of the windows. So I go over to the cops and asked what was going on. As it turns out, someone called police on the man claiming he was intoxicated or high on drugs. I noticed the man was the same who was sleeping in my lobby earlier. So I asked the cops if the guy was intoxicated or high, and it turns out he wasn't. So I asked who made the call. Turns out it was a, quote, private citizen who raised some concerns about a guy being inebriated on property. The bus station didn't call him in and didn't even know what happened. Well, turns out the cops told me it was a guy named Robert, our resident sovereign citizen. Damn it. Robert is a whiny sov-civ who really likes to tattle on people and make up outlandish stories about him getting robbed. If any of you remember Randall from Disney Recess, this is him in adult form. So I asked the cops if they'd be willing to talk to Robert and give him a warning, and they said nope. That means I need to talk to him. I pull Robert aside and asked him if he called the police on the guy. Robert said he did, and he would do it again if needed. So I had to warn Robert he was not the law at the bus station. He needed to tell me or the dispatchers if there was a problem and not take measures into his own hands. Robert got mad. He started to swear at me and walk towards me, saying I wasn't an authority over him. I finally had enough and pointed at the door. I told him to leave for the rest of the day, or I'd have him arrested for trespassing. He got the message and sulked under a tree across the street until we closed. Screw sovereign citizens and screw Robert. Story 31. It was the Super Bowl. I honestly don't remember which one. Football is boring. Got sent to a domestic to find an upset but otherwise unharmed female who was pretty small, and a much larger male that looked like he got the holy crap kicked out of him. Broken furniture and shattered glass everywhere. It was a war zone. The neighbors called us they're not them, which always means it's going to be bad. The woman refused to say anything, just cried uncontrollably and said she didn't do anything wrong. No marks on her hands, and really there was no way she beat the guy up. Said there was no one else at the house and there was no reason to think otherwise. Guy was beyond drunk, of course. The game had been over for an hour or two. He's upset, combative, and refuses to tell us who beat the hell out of him. Get the victim's advocates out there. Lots of talking, trying to sort things out. Eventually he cracks, really I think just to get us to leave. When the winner won, he got so amped up that he lost his mind and laid the smackdown on himself. And the best part, his team won. He did it because he was happy. Separately, he let the lady know he told us, and she confirmed and filled in details. It all happened. It's not illegal to beat yourself up, so we left confused and with no arrest. And that's why Super Bowl is the craziest night to work, depending on what teams are playing. Okay, while not illegal, I would still highly recommend some professional mental help. That's not like a roast or anything, that's serious. I think that would still fall under like self-harm tendencies. As strange as it may seem. Story 32. I used to be a cop, and one day I was dispatched to a home invasion robbery in progress. Once I arrived, I entered the house where several people ranging from senior citizens to young children were zip-tied wrists to ankles. They said in Spanish that the homeowner was in one of the bedrooms and that he got some shots off at the suspects. I went to the bedroom, and just inside the door was an adult male laying face down. I rolled him over, and he was obviously gone, having been shot 7 times, including once in the forehead. On the other side of the room was the homeowner. He was still alive and had also been shot 7 times, but none were fatal. He was still clicking his empty pistol. He just kept saying, "I got those mother frickers." Apparently what had happened was that the whole family was in the living room when 4 suspects kicked in the front door. The homeowner said he ran up to his room to get his pistol to defend himself as they were coming in. He said he had to load it up, so while they zip-tied the family, he hid in the room. After a few minutes passed, the dead suspect and the others started searching rooms. He said when they got to his, he stood up and they opened fire on each other. The homeowner said 4 people shot at him, and he didn't know how many he hit. He said he didn't know he got hit at first, but when he tried to chase the suspects as they ran out, he collapsed. He was shot in both his legs, the abdomen, and the left arm. The guy was such a badass, and he survived the incident. He actually hit all 4 suspects. One died and the others showed up at 2 different hospitals about an hour later. The idiots didn't wear masks, so the family was able to identify them and they got life in prison. I personally think they were going to murder everyone and that's why they didn't wear masks. They targeted that specific house because it was harvest season, and they had hundreds of pounds of processed marijuana in different stages of packaging on the property. Some was hanging to dry in a barn, some was in a big pile broken up in a bedroom, and the rest was packaged in shipping boxes ready to be moved. When this happened, recreational marijuana wasn't legal yet. The homeowner grew it for a medical dispensary, but was way over what he was allowed to grow. Story 33. My dad is a cop, so I have 2 stories he has told me. First story, he shows up to a rollover on the highway. It is a U-Haul that flipped onto its side, a different vehicle rolled. He knows there are fatalities before he even gets there. He says as he walks around the front of the upturned truck, he sees the feet first, and it already has him unsettled. First dead body, it was his 2nd week. As he keeps walking, it becomes clear that the truck's side landed just below the guy's jaw, so it completely crushed his head with the cargo area. Later that day, he gets a call for a garbage truck that backed over a homeless man. He didn't go into detail with that one, other than, stepping on a ketchup packet. He went into more detail, but that's all I actually remember, and I don't want to put out details that aren't there. Second story, about 2 months later, he gets a call about a truck driver that has an accident. He gets on the scene and everything is fine, except for a basketball-sized hole in the back door of the truck. When they open the doors, there's a motorcycle helmet in the back. The head was still in there. At the same time, a different local police department calls asking if they've had any odd motorcycle accidents, and they had the other body and the bike about 50 miles away. Turned out the trucker's lights were out and the motorcycle was going over 150 to hit that hard. Story 34. Lived in bad area of town during 2-foot snowstorm. Get home from job at 1 a.m. Car won't go up driveway and didn't have a shovel, so start using a trash can lid. Hear someone walking behind me and turn around. Giant man approached me with 2 giant sticks in his hand. I watched them with my trash can lid shield. Do you need help? Giant man at 1:30 helps dig me out of the driveway and parking spot, then drives the car into spot for me. I'm very grateful. Neighbor refuses smokes and money and takes thanks before leaving. Story 35. Not me, but my SO. Gets a call to a domestic disturbance, and when he gets there, he hears noises and yelling, and sees that the door is open, and there's a screen door in place. He walks up and bangs on the screen door and announces he's the police. After a little more noise, a disheveled man walks up inside the house carrying a gun. I need you to hand that gun to me, sir. Oh, sure. I'm glad you got here, officer. I was just about to use this on my wife. What the hell? Can I talk to your wife? She ran off when she heard you coming. Sure she did. I need to have a look through your house. Okay, come on in. But I'm telling you, she ran off. She was beating me real bad this time. Takes a quick look through the very small house and no wife. Look, you can still see her running. SO goes to the back window and in the distance can see a woman running like hell away from the house through the field. Do you want to file a complaint? Nah, we do this all the time. Can I have my gun back? So he hands the gun back and leaves, wondering how he's gonna write this up. Poor guy. I promise you, in a relationship, you don't have to get beat up, whether you're a man or woman or anything in between. It is just domestic abuse. Pretty simply. Story 36. Obligatory not a cop. I was in a cigar bar with a friend during the Olympics. Very small place, very cozy, so we're sitting in a half circle around the TV with some other patrons. One of the guys is a retired cop, probably late 60s, and he started telling us stories. Let's call him Bob. It's been a while, so I might have some details wrong. The one that fits best here was when he was a young cop sitting near an intersection practically in the middle of nowhere, and a guy rolls halfway through the intersection and comes to a dead stop. Light changes and the guy is still just sitting there. Bob turns on his lights and rolls up. The guy in the car gets out of his car and just lies down with his hands on his head. Bob is confused as hell right now. So he gets out and starts to walk over when suddenly a dozen highway patrol cars roll up, sirens blaring. Apparently the dude had been running from the highway patrol for over an hour and had almost evaded capture after slipping around a roadblock that had held up highway patrol. He just finally run out of gas right in front of Bob. He received some sort of award for apprehending the guy. Well, Bob, the universe decided that you get the credit today, and you have no say in the matter. Story 37. Cop here. Let me tell you about El Duende. It's a Hispanic term for something like a gnome, and it's the nickname for the short guy who resides in my district. One night we get a report of a robbery/stabbing and meet with the victim's friends alongside a large pool of blood. They said El Duende got stabbed and ran away. They don't know El Duende's real name. There's a trail of blood drops that lead all the way around an apartment complex and we follow it. We get to the other side right across the street from a convenience store and find a larger pool of blood. It's everywhere to the point where it looked like someone slaughtered a cow. Like it was sprayed. At this point, we're less concerned about the robbers and more concerned about finding El Duende because he might die from blood loss if we don't. The hospitals tell us he hasn't come in yet. We continue to follow the blood trail. It leads us to a different neighborhood a little less than a mile away. We even find another pool of blood similar to the first one along the way. It starts to rain and the blood trail starts disappearing. About an hour and a half has gone by. At one point, our helicopter was helping, but it had to land due to weather. The K9 is helping us. Then a call comes out for a suspicious event near where the blood ended. Someone had written something on someone's house. We walk over and see a townhouse with the words El Duende written in blood in large letters on 3 sides of the house. It turned out to be El Duende's parents' house after we describe El Duende to them. It took a while for them to realize this. There was a lot of what the hell is going on here? They told us their 30-year-old son had mental problems and stays in the park near their house. We check the park and find a guy covered in blood. His clothes are completely soaked in blood. I ask if he's El Duende and he says no. I tell him I think he's not telling the truth and he says, okay, I'm El Duende. He refuses to go to the hospital, so my buddy paid him $1 to go, and he did. It turns out his friends lied. There was no robbery. El Duende cut himself because he thought it was funny. I spent the next hour wondering what the hell just happened. Story 38. Walked into a house after getting a warrant from the judge. This was a house of a known drug dealer. I'm immediately confronted with his dog barking aggressively. I disable the dog. The guy's looking half asleep on the couch and saying something about El Epileptic, a known gang member. I kept flashing my lights into his eyes and I could see they were unevenly dilated from drug use. Weird thing is, not a single bit of coke in the house. The guy flushed it down the toilet and then had the audacity to take a crap in it afterwards to cover his tracks. Disgusting. Story 39. I'm not a cop, but my family member is. And this is a story he told us during Thanksgiving dinner. He and his partner got a call that a man was threatening to take his own life with a knife. EMS was already at scene. They pull up to the ambulance and the EMTs were hiding behind the ambulance. They asked what was going on, and the EMTs just pointed to the intersection. They got out and walked towards the intersection to find a man waving a kitchen knife in the air and his face hanging from his chin. He had cut his forehead and ripped his face off. They had also soon discovered that he had cut his side and had his arm inside his body, apparently trying to rip out his own heart. He had nightmares for weeks. There was obviously a massive amount of blood, and he said all he saw was eyes and teeth. Story 40. This is the only unsolved mystery I've handled that has continued to bother me. The prior shift had been receiving a ton of 911 hang-up calls that's been pinged to a general area with an open line on callback. The calls continued into our shift every so often. We canvassed the area of the call, knocked on a few doors, checked cell phones, nothing. I started calling the number back on my personal phone and it would answer to an open line. I started hearing general outside noises that I was hearing real time. Cars, birds. I started hitting my siren and was hearing my own siren through the call. Long story short, we managed to pinpoint the area of the call by making noises to this new pickup truck parked in a driveway. First, we're thinking maybe a Bluetooth or OnStar type error that was making the calls. We checked and nothing. We actually start banging on the truck, and we can tell that the noise is being picked up from the rear area of this truck. We looked all around this vehicle and found nothing. We kept calling and the device kept answering, and we could literally hear our own voices through the call by standing at the rear of the vehicle. We could not hear ourselves from the interior of the truck, so it wasn't a device on the inside of the cab. Eventually, we had to give up and move on with our lives. The device stopped making 911 calls and eventually stopped answering calls. The lady just bought the truck a week ago, nearly brand new with only a few thousand miles. I had a crazy theory that someone was tracking either the previous or the current owner with some kind of phone GPS device that they hid in the body of the truck. That's literally the only thing I could think of that would create this scenario. I agree, this is a really freaky one, OP. Also the fact that you couldn't find it, like I assumed you looked under it and everything. So someone hid that in there intentionally, but why was it picking up the calls automatically? That's what I don't get. Story 41. My brother's friend, an officer, told me this one. He was driving down a street in a high-end shopping area about 3 a.m. He sees a guy on a sidewalk in front of a jewelry store looking around, kinda fishy looking. He slows down to see what he's up to and watches him rear back, wind up, and throw a brick as hard as he can at the window. The windows were multi-layered glass. The brick hits the window, bounces straight back, hits the guy in the face and knocks him out. The cop is laughing so hard he can barely get out of his car. Calls it in, goes to the guy who's coming to. Broken nose, broken tooth, and blood everywhere. All the guy says is, "Wow, you can really throw a punch." Story 42. Not me, but my dad who was a cop in Orlando for about 10 years. And the only story he would tell me in detail was a call about a wellness check on an elder family member. He gets to the house and knocks. No one answers, so he announces himself and walks in to find the grandma sitting in a rocking chair, unresponsive. He goes to her front side to see her decayed and essentially looking like leather. When he helped EMTs pull her off, her back and spine had fused to the chair, so that part stayed and the rest of her came off. Was his first time seeing inside someone's body cavity, and it stuck with him for quite a bit. Story 43. Grandfather was a state trooper from early 60s to early 80s. He parked his squad at a McDonald's in the Chicago area. He's about 5 feet from his squad car when a bomb goes off inside the McDonald's. A freezer door misses him and flies straight into his squad car. After the FBI gets involved, best that they could tell, it was an action taken by the local mafia to get the store to buy their beef from the mafia instead. They just had to send a message loud and clear, apparently. This is also the start to a relationship my grandfather would build with an African-American FBI agent that would start to change his prejudices around. Story 44. Slightly different. Dad was a police officer for several years, and I've heard some graphic stories consistently. 1. A week into his first shift, and he had to go to a collision report. A motorcyclist was hauling it, and came flying around a corner, and there was a parked semi. He hit the back of the truck so hard the green dye from his leather jacket burst all over the back of the truck. My dad said it looked like someone dumped paint all over the scene and blood streaks through it. 2. He still doesn't know how this happened. He responded to a call about an elderly lady taking their life. Extremely common. My dad flew there at Mach Jesus and reported on the scene. He booked it into the bedroom and booted the door down to find her laying down beside her bed. He raised the back of her neck and started doing CPR so the airway was clear. As he did, a very, very thick black liquid started gushing out. He had no freaking idea what it could have been. Still doesn't to this day. Said about half a liter came out. 3. Probably his most graphic scene, and one that is probably still the main route for his PTSD. For backstory, I have 3 siblings. My dad got a call for a head-on collision about 15 minutes away from his station. Naturally, he coded there. Upon arrival, everyone on the street, including first responders, were pale white. No one was moving except the firefighters who were basically clearing up. My dad had to do the investigation, and once he started heading for one of the cars, he noticed from the side mirror that the seat belts hadn't been placed in the clip. He glanced up and saw how far the street was cut off to the public, and it stretched about 500 meters. He went to one of the cars and there were 3 bodies on the inside, not a single head on any of them. He noticed that there were 4 pairs of shoes inside the car, however. He walked around the scene for 15 minutes and found a girl, roughly my sister's age, 16 at the time, under an SUV without a head. He spent 30 minutes walking around the street looking for 4 heads belonging to the ages of all of his kids. His head was basically spinning, and his body took over and finished the rest of the job. I remember the night he came home and called all of us into the living room. Not a word was said, just a look of shock and him glaring at us for 2 hours, looking at every single detail about us, as if he was holding back crying. I did ask him about posting this, and he said he was comfortable with it. Love you, Dad. You're the best man I have and ever will meet. Glad you finally retired, though. Story 45. This wasn't me, not a cop, but a friend who is a volunteer paramedic at a music festival in British Columbia called Shambhala. She was working one day and, being her 3rd or 4th year, thought she'd seen it all. People tripping balls and falling, heat exhaustion, heat stroke from no water, tons of coke, and 35-degree weather. This particular day there was an emergency, and a man comes on a stretcher covered in blood. He had a bad trip on acid apparently, and his dong wouldn't stop yelling at him, so, naturally, he took 2 rocks and smashed it. She hasn't gone to the festival ever since. Story 46. Not a cop, not even close, but I saw something screwed up in a place in India. I was traveling in the local bus in northern India. The buses are really crowded all the time, so much that people hang from the entry/exit doors using a bar as support, so this one guy falls flat on his back. But since his fulcrum was 1.5 feet above the ground, imagine the motion of a lever, his legs being the fixture, he swiveled onto the road, head first, and he fell hard. His skull cracked open. The most screwed up part was nobody batted an eye. They just sat him down on a seat as the bus continued with its daily stops. I got off before they could do anything about him. He looked young enough to have been in college. I don't understand what to think of the event to this day. Story 47. Ex-police here. Got called out to a motorbike crash. Guy was riding and a car U-turned without looking and subsequently plowed right into the side of this biker. Biker was generally okay. Called an ambulance as precaution and checked over insurance and all that jazz. Biker was riding with a few friends when the accident happened, and asked if we were happy for them to recover the bike to save us calling for recovery, as one of them had a truck and trailer. We okayed that and the biker shot off to get his truck. It must have been 5 minutes when a bus pulled over at our scene, a woman shouting to us that there'd been an accident on the next road along. As we were 2 units, my colleague and I left the first scene to go to this new accident literally 300 meters away on a side country road. As we turn the corner, pull up, we see an awfully familiar motorbike smashed into a lorry. It was our first biker's friend. In his rush to help recover his friend's bike, he got into an accident with a lorry and ended up much worse off than his friend. Severe head injuries and had to be airlifted to hospital. To make matters worse, his bike was also a write-off, and he ended up in much worse condition than his friend. Poor lad. Story 48. A cleaner said there was some blood on a train station platform, and if we had any police tape to block it off with until someone came and cleaned it up. Partner and I walk up with some tape, and there's probably 5 or 6 small pools of blood and some splatter on trash cans and walls, as if a bunch of people had been stabbed/slashed. I called the desk officer to see if anyone reported anything, and a lady had called a couple hours earlier saying she had fell and there was a, quote, little blood on the platform. Obviously, it wasn't from a fall. So I sent the photos and they had an oh crap moment and went to her house to check on her. Turns out the blood was already there when she fell, and none of the probably hundreds of commuters that got on and off the trains thought to say anything to anyone. Hospitals and other local agencies didn't have any reports of injured persons with significant blood loss, and blood was later confirmed to be human. Found out a couple weeks later it was someone with a chronic stomach infection that had just vomited blood in different places on the platform and continued about his day. Normal for him. As far as I know, he's fine. Okay, maybe normal for him. Still a horrific biohazard. He should probably tell someone when that happens. Story 49. When I was an MP in the Marines, we got a call from a drunk guy about domestic assault. Me and my beat partner roll up, and before we can get to the house, this drunk gunny, E7, comes stumbling out of the house and shouts, "My wife was using too much teeth. That's assault. Arrest her." For a solid 30 seconds, we just kind of stared at him with our hands on our tasers, wondering what the hell we fell into. After separating and talking to both parties, the wife was damn close to stone cold sober. According to her, she just wasn't in the mood. So she did a bad job hoping he would give up and go to bed. But this dude just wasn't having it. We talked the gunny down and convinced him to crash on his buddy's couch down the street. About halfway there, he asked who would blow him if he was sleeping on his friend's couch. Luckily, he passed out as soon as he sat down. I guess all that excitement got him all tuckered out. Come on, man. You can't be making calls like that for domestic assault. Unless you, bit down on your thing. You know what? I regret saying that, actually. Never mind. What a way to end this thread. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or a night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.